Here is the lovely Gina come to join us as well. Hello, Gina. Lovely to have you here. So welcome everybody, formally. We're here today to celebrate the launch of Home to Her with Liz, the beautiful author of our book. So I am here in Ireland and she is all the way across the ocean in the US, in Virginia. And we are gathered today to dive deeper into the world of Home to Her, how it came about, the writing process, so who, what, why, where, and when behind the book. And I'd love to open with a few words from the book, which I'm going to read, but we will hear lots from Liz in a second. So this is the beginning of chapter 3, and these words really speak to me. In the beginning was her, always her, only her, rolling, undulating in the waters from which she emerged, the water herself and the creation that poured forth, self-generating, a virgin in the truest, oldest sense of the word. She is the deepest dark of the earth, the blackest of nights, the holy silence of the womb. She is the light within the darkness that tenderly cradles light, the ecstasy and the terror forever entwined, the urgent pulse of creation, the crackle and hum of divine energy that surrounds us all, waiting to be heard, waiting to be felt. She is everything. She is nothingness. She alone is. Liz, those words, where did they come from? When did they come to you? How did they come about?
Oh my gosh, as you were reading that, I was like, I didn't write that. I think she wrote that. That's sort of a thing with writing the book. You know, there are parts of a book where you sit down and it's a bit of a slog. You know, you gotta get the words down, and then and you're really working it. And then there are parts like that just show up and seem to flow through and into the pen. And honestly, I'm not being humble when I say I don't feel like in those cases that those have very much to do with me at all. They're like something that she needs to say, and I got to be the messenger, and how lucky am I? So, yeah. I
know that experience so well, and it's so tricky to describe to people who, if they haven't had that experience, if writing isn't their kind of way of expressing what comes through. What kind of part of the process would something like that have come through? Would that have been kind of early on in the writing process, or like would you have got seeds of that sort of thing coming through before you decided to organize it into a book? Or was the book more kind of a structured idea first and then these things flowed in?
Well, can I tell you a little story about how the book actually came to be? Because maybe this will sort of kind of answer it. So in the beginning, when I still had my business, I was still very deeply in my business career. Leaving that was extremely painful for me, and I did what I think a lot of people do when you exit something that you know you need to exit, and you have no idea what's coming next. You really want to fill the void because it's so uncomfortable being in the void. So I remember being days after the sale of my company closed, being like, okay, what am I going to do next? I am going to come up with the next big thing. And of course, nothing's happening, right? So a few days though, after the sale of my company, I woke up in the morning and I had this very clear voice in my head that said, make any decisions that you want, but know that everything is going to change in 7 months. And I thought that was so odd and specific. 7 months, like what a weirdly specific number. So I kind of filed it in the back of my head, but I did write it down, fortunately. So I captured it somewhere. And then I went on and tried to, kind of figure out who I was going to be in this next iteration of my life. I started doing a yoga teacher training program and, started to dive some into this research just for myself because I wanted to know who the divine feminine was. And I was about, a couple months into this teacher training program when, again, one morning I woke up and it was like somebody had spoken in my head, you were going to write a book. And it was the weirdest thing because I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything to write at that point. It was the most absurd idea ever that I would be writing a book. I was still just learning, but I had a whole structure that was flowing into my head of what needed to show up and when. So I grabbed my journal and my pen, and it was early. I remember before anybody else was awake, and I went to go write down the structure. And as I did, my journal fell open to the day that I had written down the 7-month directive. And it was, so the date I believe was October 7th. And the date that I was writing on was May 6th. So it was almost 7 months to the day. So the structure completely changed like 50 times. None of that really stuck, but I think the inspiration came at that point. And I don't remember when that specific piece that you read, Lucy, came through. But I do know that the book kind of came in pieces, like the personal part of it, that part was easier to write. Some of the research, really, I would have to sit down and kind of almost like wrestle with, or it's like you're trying to grab a thread that's like up here. And then once you got it, you're like, okay, it's going. And then there would be other pieces that were just so clear when I was trying to think of who she is and how I might articulate that. And I do know that that piece was one of those where it just was like whoosh, kind of came in. Does that kind of answer your question?
That was a fabulous answer to the question. Right. What suddenly occurred to me, was this planned? So we were supposed to be launching tomorrow. No, not tomorrow, Friday, which was October 7th.
Yes.
And then we suddenly had to shift it about 6 weeks ago because Liz said, are you guys aware that it's a public holiday here in the US? And so people are going to be busy. And we were like, oh, okay. No, we weren't. So we shifted it a week backwards. But that October 7th, that's a really interesting. Were you aware of that when we were planning the date for the launch?
Well, I was. Once we talked about moving it into the fall, I started looking at all the dates, and I'm not an astrologer, but I'm curious, like what's happening? Are there retrogrades? Are there planets doing this or that? And then I remembered the October 7th, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, this feels apropos because I think at that point it was 7 years ago. Wow. The original message of make any plans you want, but everything's changing in 7 months. So. Yeah.
So how does it feel having the book out in the world now?
It feels really surreal. I mean, when all of you just held the book up, it was, I don't know. I don't even know how to put that in words. I started working on it in 2016, I think. And I do, and I apologize. My dog is snoring really loudly. So if you happen to hear anything in the background, it's good that he's so relaxed. So anyways, the book was an idea. The book has been an idea in my head for many years. It's been something I've been journeying with. I've talked to friends and family about the fact that I was writing it. But surreal is the word that I'm coming up with. It just feels really strange to see it in people's hands and to see people posting about it on social media. I'm a little in awe of, oh, wow, that message, like that really worked. That something actually came out of that. That's amazing. Yeah.
And I don't know if people know the backstory of this. So Liz submitted to me several years ago an earlier draft. And I mean, I get between 40 and 50 submissions each time, and we can publish maybe 2, maybe 3 of them. And Liz's was the one that got away. Liz's I said no to because it didn't feel quite right. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. All the rooks are coming into roost around me, and my brain is just jumping up and down with excitement because it's my favorite time of day. So I'm trying not to get distracted. They're beautiful and the sun is setting. So I said no because it wasn't ready. But I loved Liz and I loved the idea, and I could see the seeds of a really good book in there. So kind of travel forward a bit, Liz had me onto her podcast, and we got on really well. And I can't remember if it was the first or the second time that I went onto your podcast. I said to you, look, I kind of need to say this, that like your book is there in my mind, and I still want to see it, but it just wasn't ready then. And I've never done that with any other books. Normally with a book, a no is a no, end of story. But with hers, there was just something that I couldn't let go of, but I knew it wasn't ready then. And so it has been an absolute honor to watch her rework that material, deepen that material into what it has become. Just so lovely. And such a like phew moment, you know, because you kind of you offer this kind of opportunity and you think, you know, will it be okay? And it was like more than okay. And so that was just so fabulous to see, because a lot of people, you know, can get kind of rather the draft that they would submit would be kind of everything they've got to give. And yeah, I could see in Liz that there was this hunger for more, knowing more, understanding more, diving deeper. And I could hear that in the podcast. I could hear that in how she was talking with people and the research she was doing around her podcast. So I could see that she was, you know, she was on the cusp of something really profound. And it was just, could she get that into book form? Because you can be a fabulous speaker and not necessarily a fabulous writer, but I could see in her previous draft that she was also a fabulous writer. So all that to say, very excited.
Well, and I just, if it's okay, Lucy, I'd like to say that I mean this very sincerely. I think the rejection that you gave me was the greatest gift that you could have given me. Honestly, I needed it. I think that first draft, there was a lot of processing of what had happened for me in this journey. And I needed to write it down because I'm a writer, but that doesn't mean that all of that needed to be in the book. I think so. When I went back and looked at the draft, I realized like, some of this was me processing this amazing experience in the way in which it's healed me. And some of it still needed to be in the draft. But a lot of it didn't need to. And so can I tell another story? Is that okay? Okay.
That's what you're here for.
Okay. All right. So you may or may not have gotten to this in the book, but in 2020, my family and I, we ended up selling our house in California, and we moved into an RV, and we spent 8 months traveling across the country, homeschooling our kids for the year. I didn't want to do Zoom kindergarten for my son. And I think we knew for a variety of reasons that our time in California was done. And when we moved into the RV, I was still hosting the podcast. So that was a hoot. I talked to Lucy from, I don't know where, somewhere, so somewhere out west, I think. But I kind of thought, well, I'll keep doing the podcast for a little while, I guess, but I might be done with this. I'm just going to put the book, the book didn't get picked up. I'm just going to put it behind me. And then I started having these dreams on the road. And in one of them, it was very vivid. There was a nun by the name of Bernadette who came to me and said that I was supposed to build a church. I was supposed to build a church to the divine feminine. And it was supposed to kind of look like a church. Like it shouldn't be too scary. It shouldn't be too out there. It shouldn't be too weird for people, but it was a church dedicated to the divine feminine. Now, I don't take that in any way like I'm literally supposed to build a church, but I thought it was funny that I had this dream right after I decided, maybe I'm done with all this. And it wasn't long after that Lucy extended this invitation to, rework my material and resubmit it. And so that sort of felt like a loud from the universe, like, no, you're not actually done yet.
Well, here's a funny thing, that when I was in my late teens, end of school, so 17, 18, there was this name Bernadette that kept coming through really strong for me. And I didn't know any more than that. I thought maybe I was going to call a child Bernadette, and then I married a man who thought that wasn't probably a good idea. So maybe she's hovering around in both of our consciences, because yeah, that was just a really strong Bernadette was there. Don't know what she wanted, but she was there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess maybe she decided to skip along over to my consciousness and keep me focused. But it was such a great nudge and an invitation that you gave me to then go back into it and see and right away when I looked at the draft, right away I knew. I was like, oh, this could be better. And I want to make it better. I really, really want to. So.
And a lot of my favorite stuff is the newer editions. And I am in awe of the way that you have tackled, feels like such a male word, but tackled such a tricky subject, managed to give words to something which is so challenging to do. So there's a couple of bits that I want to kind of touch on now. My brain's going in two different directions, but the first is just the way that you organized who is she into, because a lot of the time when we try to define something, we try and give it like a definition, one definition. And I love the way that you refuse to do that, and that she is defined in many different ways, all of which coexist. Because to do anything less, to simplify her, is to not understand her in the beginning. So who is she? She is creatrix, originator, great mother. She is a living tradition. She is a historical fact. She is sacred earth, the ground beneath our feet. She is the old woman, beloved ancestor. She is our sweetness and our hope, a partner in prayer. She is the goddess within, sacred feminine as the indwelling presence of the divine. She is divine sorceress, magic maker. And she is the healing medicine we need. Just each of those facets, just to be able to put your finger on them and to be able to hold all of those different threads and weave them and not try to say, well, it's this, so it can't be that. I love that so much. Defining her, defining the sacred feminine, defining goddess is so tricky. And I love your opening where you wrestle with what so many of us are taught, and then the responses that so many of us get when we do try to voice something of the sacred feminine in the world and get shut down by male voices saying, well, God is he, you can't make it any different. And I love the way that you shared that, because I think most of us have some sort of experience of that being shut down, that being silenced when we are in our nascent, questioning, wondering phase and being told, nope, you're wrong, it's rubbish, you're making it up, it's wishful thinking. When we have this knowing that has been awoken in us, some sort of experience of she, some sort of experience of the divine or the sacred beyond what we have been taught within Christianity or patriarchal religion. And so we have this inner knowing, this little tiny flame that's been kindled, but we can't yet find anything on the outside to back that up. And I think so many women are in that experience of the inner not being reflected in the outer. They haven't found any of those threads yet in our world. And my dearest hope is that this book is going to be a guidebook for so many women who are there. I think it's really rich for those of us who are further along that path, who want to know more, who want to unpack it more, who want more facts and figures at our fingertips, who want another companion on the journey who's been there too. It's rich for us. But imagine at the beginning of your journey, if you were in a bookshop and you happened upon this, or if somebody you knew who heard you talking bought this for your birthday and gave this to you, and you dived in like hungry, thirsty woman in the desert. And this was your portal in, your permission slip, your acknowledgement of all that she is. Imagine. So those of us who know and have done this journey for a long while have wrestled with a lot of the terminology around it. And the sacred feminine is definitely one of those terms which is tricky. And Liz and I have had a long conversation on her podcast, Home to Her, about that, about our wrestling. And we might go back to that now, but I want to read a little bit from the beginning here about that. It's hard to stand up and be seen as an unabashed advocate for conversations about the sacred, let alone the still controversial notion that it's acceptable to discuss God in female form. It's still hard for me to share views that I know go against the grain of so much conventional thinking, no matter how much historical evidence of the sacred feminine I've amassed over the years. And yet, I keep doing it. It's almost like the sacred feminine stoked a long dormant flame in me years ago, and that flame has been desperate to find fuel so that it can grow and grow and grow. I live for those moments when I tell someone that I research and write about women's sacred histories and see reflected back at me, not a glazed look of discomfort, but a spark of hungry recognition that matches my own. I don't know where the passion comes from. I only know that since that flame was first lit by her, it has sought out fuel. It has pushed me to speak even when I feel afraid, to write words that I know might invite criticism, to hold space for community about her, to invite others to speak to me about their experience of her, and to spend years researching and writing this book. I can only assume that she wants the flame to grow, for others to see her sparks, and for their individual flames to grow brighter, hotter, and be more visible to all too. I think you articulate so beautifully that longing and that hunger and that desire that so many of us experience, along with that feeling of fear, worry, anxiety, shame, concern about how we will be received. Could you talk a little to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about also in what ways that's evolved over this journey of writing and having this Facebook group that I have and doing the podcast. And, you know, it's funny because I'm not a visual artist, and yet I think very often in pictures. I see things in pictures. And so I'm almost seeing, you know, some of the hardest parts of that is kind of taking the stand, or, you know, standing, like getting rooted in that truth, and then, you know, like opening the mouth, and then like there's sort of a reorientation of the landscape around you where, or like the picture starts to shift, you know, and then there are people and situations and experiences that begin to reflect back to you this truth that you know in yourself. But the really hard part is actually standing in the truth in the first place. And I think especially in the beginning, because I was so all in on what I understood was the best way to be a feminist. And I really believed that the best way for me to do that was to prove that I was smart enough and ambitious enough, courageous enough to succeed in spaces that had traditionally been dominated by men. And I think that in a way that I wouldn't, maybe in a subconscious way, I almost felt like that was my responsibility. You know, like I knew that for my mother's generation, she didn't have those doors open for her, and I did, and certainly not for my grandmother. So this is the way that I am going to be an advocate for women. I would hire women, and most of my clients were women, and we started a scholarship program for girls. And I do still feel really good about all of that. But I think at the core of that as well, there was still kind of like this energy of like, well, whatever's the feminine, we need to push that away, without any kind of awareness of like that internalized misogyny that I had. And so my whole world was kind of oriented in that way. And so then when I had this awakening, this spark that happened, it was super disorienting. And I had no idea even how to speak about it. And I'm curious now, because this was 8.5 years ago or so at this point, I'm curious now if things have really shifted in the world so much, or if just my world has shifted so much so that, my world is now full of the most amazing individuals that can meet me in this space. It's so wonderful. But at the time, it was incredibly lonely. And the first few times that I had a blog very early on where I would write about some of these things, and the words were like, it was like energy that was bottled up inside me. Like it had to get out. And it seemed like very much it did not want to be in a journal. It wanted to be publicly shared. It needed to go there. And yet I would hit publish, even knowing that there's like maybe 2 people that are going to see my blog or whatever. And it still felt so emotionally charged and so like, oh gosh, And I started publishing on Medium, and I wrote a piece right after the hearings of Brett Kavanaugh, and he was confirmed here in the United States. I don't know, for those of you that are not in the United States, if you know who this is one of our Supreme Court justices who had a very, very credible charge of sexual assault against him. Our Congress people didn't care. They went ahead and confirmed him. Like, I think they believed this woman, and they still went ahead and confirmed him. And so I wrote a piece about how I found comfort from the divine feminine in this moment, and seeing, taking a vision of time as deep time. Like, this is a setback, and yet there is an inevitability to the way things are unfolding that I think is much larger than this moment. And Medium picked up that article and chose to feature it across their front page. And then they had somebody audio record it. And it was terrifying, but it was also, I was so grateful for that. It felt like a reflection back, like almost like she, in a way, was giving me permission to say, it's all right, keep going. It's okay. You can do this. And it hasn't always been like that. I've definitely had pushback, or, I think equally as often I'll get the glazed over polite, like, oh, that's nice, kind of look. But I do think every step that I've taken, it gets easier. And I do feel that there's some sort of energetic reorientation again, of like the people coming into my life that make it easier. I think if I were doing this over and over and that didn't happen, this would be infinitely harder. Yeah.
And shall we go there about terminology? Shall we?
Yeah.
I mean, how does, because you and I both have kind of finding terms for she can be tricky. Has it evolved at all since you've written the book? Are you still pretty much where you were when you wrote the book?
Do you mean in terms of saying sacred feminine, or yeah. It has kind of evolved. And I think part of that, I'm so grateful for the experiences that I've had with the podcast for the last couple of years. Lucy, you talked about, not needing to define her in set ways. And I think the gift of talking to so many different people over the last 2.5 years has been hearing people define her in different ways. And hearing people have really big reactions to certain words, has also made me feel comfortable being more fluid and saying, again, why do I don't have to define this for you or anyone else. So I've started with the podcast, actually even stepping away from the language of the sacred feminine and asking people, inviting people to use their own words and then to tell me why they use those words. And just a whole space for that. And I don't think we have to agree. Like, why do we have to agree? Like, we just, can honor how each of us is coming at it. So, I mean, I guess for now, I am still kind of in this space of saying sacred feminine. I'm really wanting like a telepathic language. I feel like if we could just, look at each other, we'd be like, yeah, I know what you mean. Or some evolved language. I don't know.
I love the way that what you say is so basic as to be ridiculous that you even need to say it, and yet so profound as to be, why don't we do that? Which is, you let people define the sacred and the divine in their own words. Like, how many of us have had that experience from our communities, from our faith leaders, from our teachers of, can you feel the sacred? Can you see it? Can you sense it? What is it to you? And excited, what is it? Tell me about it, rather than, I will tell you what the sacred is. I will tell you who God is. I will tell you what to believe. Imagine if we did it that way around. Imagine if it was standard to a 3-year-old to say, tell me about it. Tell me what you feel. Tell me what you see. What is it? So that we can all learn more about the sacred, the divine, the unknown, the mystery. That it was that exciting adventure all together, and that we each had our own different way of perceiving it, and that's great that we're all perceiving different facets of it at different times in our lives in different ways. We're not quite there yet, though, are we?
No, there is this whole tendency to want to define things for other people. And I mean, that's a whole conversation we could have, right? About about how we are oriented culturally right now. I think a lot of that has to do with hierarchy and patriarchy, and there shall be one God and it's me, and, all of that. But I had, and I write about her, my intuition teacher, was very helpful for me when I was first on this journey. And I do remember talking to her once about, I was having a conversation with a friend and asking the friend some questions that were interesting to me, but I think she felt like she was being challenged. I was more like, what brings you joy? Tell me about your life. And I think perhaps because she wasn't in a joyful space, she received that almost, it made her really uncomfortable. And so I was explaining that to my intuition teacher and telling her I feel kind of bad about this. And she said, why do you feel bad? You made her uncomfortable. What a gift. You gave her an opportunity to reflect on her life. And I reminded myself of that every time. And there have been times when there are people that come on the podcast in particular who have views that are radically different than mine and experiences that are different than mine. And I do feel that little bit of rub, of like, well, that's not how I experience it. And then I remember those words of my teacher. I'm like, well, what a gift. What a gift that they've given me to see the sacred and experience the sacred from their eyes. And can I see it from their eyes? And if I can't, then why not? Because that has something to do with me. That doesn't have anything to do with them. And so that expansion has been such a gift, even when it's uncomfortable. It's a gift that I wish everybody could have, truly. Because if you are, and again, the divine feminine is what oriented me to the idea of all of life being sacred. Then if all of life is sacred, then it's right there. It's in your experience and my experience. And there is nothing for me to do except listen and sit with that, almost like a riddle, if it doesn't make sense to me, of how that is also sacred.
Thank you for the passing on that gift just there, because the thing that I find most challenging about my work is the possibility that I will make other people uncomfortable. I find that intolerable. As a caretaker of other people's feelings and thoughts, and a good girl and an anticipator of any possible conflict so that I can alleviate it before it happens, the feeling of making people uncomfortable is horrific to me. And yet, by the very action of my work, that is what I am doing. Not in order to cause conflict, but that is what I am doing, because I am saying things that not everybody is going to agree with. I am saying things that are going to make people uncomfortable. So thank you for that gift of the piece around making people uncomfortable. And please, can you write that down for me and email it to me so that I have it in your wise words, so that I don't morph it in my own head, but I can come back to it again and again.
I will. And props to my intuition teacher, Devika, who really was the first one that gave me those words. So they're her words too.
You passed them on. So thank you to you and thank you to her. And curious about, because I was talking to my editing group yesterday about how do you know when a work is finished? A book can never necessarily be, you have to decide when it's finished. Like, there can always be more that you can add to it. I'm curious, we're only several months down now the line of you having been able to make any changes to it. Is there anything that you had to, because of courage, time, word limits, that you had to leave out that you wish could be in there? Or anything that you've discovered since you finished the writing that you're like, oh, I wish I could just shoehorn that in as well?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I mean, I still am obsessed. That's not the right word. I am still fascinated by researching the historical aspects of the sacred feminine. And it is an incredible challenge and fun to me to figure out how to take these more academic works and distill it into a way in which people that I think may not be, who are not interested in academic work, are actually going to want to read this. And so I feel like in that, and I'm trying to think of an example for you, Lucy, and none are specifically coming to mind, but there's certainly people that I've interviewed on the podcast, books of theirs that I've read, historical things that I've learned where I'm like, oh, I wish that was in there, like I could have added it in there. But a lot of this has felt there, it's just this interesting play for me. This is the first book I've written, and it might be the only one, I don't know. But there's this interesting play of like your own personal will sort of pushing something forward, and this larger force that wants it to be done. And whatever this larger force has felt pretty clear to me. You're done. You did it. This is it. You're done. It is a finished thing. It is imperfect, as all things are, but it is done. It is accomplished. And that feeling for the most part has kind of stayed with me, which is nice, because I haven't spent a lot of time going back, did I do this? Did I do that? I know in the same way that when I read the first draft that I had sent to you, Lucy, when I looked back at it in the fall of 2020 and was like, nope. I know that I will evolve. Well, if I'm lucky, I will evolve, right? I shouldn't be the same person that wrote this book 5 years from now. I really should be someone different again. And so I would imagine that I'd go back and will be like, oh yeah, I would want to change that. But I felt, for me, this draft, I was holding in myself integrity. Like, is this as good as I can get it in this moment? Is this the best way I can say it in this moment? And I feel like I accomplished that. So I hope that even in 5 years, if I'm a radically different person, that I will look back and say, this book was in integrity and deeply reflective of who I was and what I discovered at that point in my life. And hopefully it will still be in service to people.
Now a question for you, which is very personal from me, and it's a curious question. So I've just had several months of horrible migraines, and when I get migraines, our author Molly Reamer, who also gets a lot of headaches, says that when she gets her headaches, it feels like her soul is sucked from her, and then when it starts to abate and she starts to feel better, it feels like her soul comes back to her. And I really feel that with being ill. I feel like not only my soul is sucked from me, but any faith that I have, any feeling of connection to the sacred or the divine evaporates. And I try to remind myself to reconnect, to pray, to call out for support from the other than material basis here, but it feels kind of forced and false. Whereas when I am fully in my own energy and feeling good and out in the world, I see her everywhere. I am connected to her. I know her to be real. But when I am ill, it is like she isn't there, and I have to re-establish that relationship again and again. I was wondering, do you have that? Do you get that sense of disconnection from her and then having to reconnect again? Or do you kind of have a reasonably kind of constant and consistent feeling of connection and relationship with the sacred and the sacred feminine?
No, I mean, I'm right there with you. I think that absence and presence it's very much, I mean, I wish it wasn't, but I wonder if that's part of the dance with the divine and being in a human body, right? Like the sort of if we put it in playful terms, it's the peekaboo of it, right? Like the joy of rediscovery is so delicious, but then like you've got to be in the dark to have that joy of rediscovery. And I definitely have had those. And I don't write about it really in this book, so who knows, maybe there's more, but I did, there was a few years where I was dealing with chronic pain. I've also had some bouts of depression, and that's when it's very, very, very hard to find her. There are other times when, I'm a mom of two little kids. They're 8 or just turned 8 and 11. And so I feel like I'm very much in that era of I drive people around and I organize people's schedules and I'm juggling all these things. And, if I don't get up and have quiet every day, then I feel very unmoored and ungrounded and untethered to her. Things like that can be fairly easily to remedy, right? Like I need to get more sleep. I need to reorganize my schedule. I need to find those 10 minutes so that I can reconnect. The bigger ones, the things like you're talking about with pain, and for me, the depression, those have been harder to navigate. I do think a prayer practice has been super helpful for me. And I do write in the book about how I pray the rosary, and I do not identify as Christian. I was not raised Catholic. So I have no negative hangups on Catholicism personally, or I didn't have anything that happened to me related to the rosary. And I've changed the words to make it more divine feminine. And I think even when it feels rote, because you're doing it every day, it's like 5 decades, you say the same thing over and over, it is an anchor point. And so if nothing else, I have that. And I really do try to do that every single day, even if I fall asleep doing it. And if I fall asleep doing it, then I take that as a gift and a sign from her. You just gave me sleep. Thank you. You're here. You helped me put whatever was going on down for enough time so I could rest. But I definitely have those moments of disconnect. I'm not having it right now because I'm sitting here talking to all of you, which just feels so blissful and divine. So, but yeah.
Thank you. I want to open the floor now just to see if any questions have come up while you're listening to us talk. If anybody does have a pressing question, and I know that a few people have joined us since I did ask that initially. So I'm just going to leave the floor open for a few moments. Yes, Nancy.
It's not so much a question as a reflection, as if I was looking in a mirror. I've had that approach, avoidance, for, well, I'm older than you are, so longer than you. The business of the absence and trusting through the absence is well known, I think, in all religions and in spiritual systems. It's something that happens, and you survive it, and you can go more deeply, I've worked as a spiritual director for a little over 30 years and was ordained in a progressive Christian denomination 40 years ago. And I no longer use the word Christian for myself. I hold on to Jesus as a universal spirit, and that's the voice in my head that I have heard. But thank you. Thank you for articulating what I have not yet been able to in many instances and for living into it. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Gina.
I think it's really interesting, Liz, that you have found the rosary as a helpful mantra. And I am a cradle Catholic, recovering Catholic, RC, we call ourselves. And I am drawn to the rosary because of the resonance of female prayer and orientation. But I think that what's interesting to me is that patriarchal religions instill shame. And so, even in your discussion and in Lucy's discussion of feeling the goddess, I call her the goddess, closer or farther away, I hear a little bit of self castigation that why can't I hang on to this deep, full connection every single fucking minute of my life? But that's shame. That's that patriarchal notion of if you are not completely good, you're bad.
Yeah.
And so
For
I think that,
me, Gina, sorry, for me, there is the concern that I am making her up. And therefore,
right,
when I can't feel her, it's because
because you made her up.
I'm not making her up anymore. So she's not there. She doesn't have any greater existence. It was just me making up nice things in my head, nice stories in my head, voices in my head. And then when I'm feeling shitty, it's because I don't have the power to make that up anymore. That is my worry.
Right. I think for me, and I have too experienced this ebb and flow of connectivity and a degree and bandwidth, ability to connect to anything besides being mom's drive-a-rama for a period of time, is that I hear the shame. I reflect back the years of I am not worthy to receive you. Us cradle Catholics know that one every single damn day of our lives. I am not worthy, I am not worthy, I am not worthy. And the way we would demonstrate worthiness was by being so good that it isn't questionable. And if we lose that connection or it feels more distant, we feel like we failed. And there's shame with it in my historical experience. And I think that that's such a delicious aspect of the sacred feminine, is that it is a reciprocal relationship. It's like your best friend. And if you don't call her for 5 days, she doesn't hate you. She isn't going to condemn you to hell. She'll be glad when you call. And I think it's the same for me with the goddess, is that, wow, I talked to her again. She's happy I called. Not that there's shame and blame coming at me, but it's taken me a long time to work through that, the historical shame blame that I get from patriarchy. So that's my feeling about that ebb and flow at the yin and yang of that aspect. It's a reciprocal relationship, and sometimes you just can't get on the phone.
Yeah.
You
Thank
bring to
you, Gina.
mind a little quote that I really just I picked out and I wanted to read. So thank you for prompting me on that one. So for now, I'm embracing her lovingly with the words sacred feminine, while also acknowledging that this name might not work for you, and that's perfectly fine. If there's one thing I've learned about her, it's that there will never be a name big enough to encompass all of her. Ultimately, she is everything, which means we get to call her whatever we want. So what should you call her? Honestly, I don't think she cares, just as long as you call her.
Yeah.
Nancy?
I do have a question. I have experienced great anger at the divine feminine for abandoning us to patriarchy. Have you run into that?
That was a wonderful question. I haven't, and I want to lean into that. So I thank you for sharing that. And I don't want to say anything back to, well, she hasn't. Like I can see how you would feel that way. I think
I feel like Gina's books kind of speak to that in a way.
Well, and I was just going to say too, really quickly here, part of the work for me in writing the book, and I really came at her from a historical perspective. Once I started looking around, if you go to, granted, white colonial patriarchy has done a bang up job destroying indigenous wisdom all over the world. Like, I mean, it's just incredible, but they haven't been able to stomp all of it out. And when you turn to indigenous traditions, she's usually always there. Like she's there. And so she may not be called the divine feminine or sacred feminine or goddess or whatever, but there is very much her presence in her. The sacredness of her is still there. So I think for me, that storyline of we have been abandoned becomes a little bit more complicated for me. It becomes more complex because if I expand my view to include all of that, then we have not, in fact, been abandoned. Like we can see her presence everywhere, but it's then a very complex question of, like, for those of us of European descent, for example, where we've got a really clear story of how patriarchy has done work. Then I can see that inquiry, coming to life.
So in Gina's books, especially Sisters of the Solstice Moon, like she imaginatively engages with that oncoming of patriarchy is almost inevitable, is almost foreseen. And therefore she foresaw that and got her priestesses to hide her wisdom, to pass her knowledge and her magic down generation after generation, but it had to be in secret because this was something that humanity had to go through, but she was there passing through. So she hadn't abandoned us, but she had to be in hiding because this is what humanity needed to do. Is that a fair summing of what you say, Gina?
Yes, exactly. To me, it always felt like, and again, referring back to the yin yang symbol, within the darkness of the yin, there is the white circle of the yang, and within the other, there is the other. And that nothing disappears, like matter doesn't disappear, right? It is transformed. It was always this notion that if, as Liz says, if you look in a very broad perspective, the goddess is everywhere and she never shut up. But she was very, very, very quiet in a Western European Judeo-Christian tradition, but never disappeared completely. And so in my books, what I like to do is think about, well, where is she? How is she still talking to people, and who did still speak for her? And how do we make that noise louder? How do we ratchet up the volume there to help make the transition that I believe is also inevitable back to a return of the divine feminine?
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you, Gina. I'm aware that we're coming to close to the end of time. I just want to ask if there are any other questions. Then
I would just say
Yeah.
that I tuned in late. I'm sorry, I got in late, so I tuned in as soon as I could. And and it sounds like I missed a lot of good stuff. But
we'll get a recording tomorrow, so.
Okay, great. And my and I only received this book in the mail just the other day from the UK. And my friend Arla Patch is the one who designed the cover. Yes. And I know she's only involved with really the finest of things. And so that brought me into this place right now. So I just wanted to actually just say hello.
Thank you for speaking her name, because it was my intention to say that, because the amount of love that this cover has got, it is just, it is, I feel like a mother, and I shouldn't really have favorites amongst books and covers, but this is one of my very favorite covers. It is so beautiful.
Yeah,
And
she's
so
she's a
speaks to the
lovely, lovely.
spirit of the book.
Absolutely. Yeah, all of her work
Yes.
does that as well. So
Mm.
It's so powerful. I had a beautiful conversation with her about how, how this piece of art came together. And this work was shared in the Facebook group that I manage. That's, I saw it even before Lucy and I were discussing covers, and then we started thinking about it, and I remembered this. But Arla is going to join me on the podcast, I think, in the next month or so. So we will talk more about her art. She also does some amazing, amazing healing work with Indigenous folks in the United States. And so I'm excited to be in conversation with her because she's super special.
yeah, she is. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diana, for calling her in. That was an
Absolutely.
omission of mine, and she is an integral piece of this book. Like, every time you pick that up, you have her work in your hands, and just
Totally,
so
totally.
beautifully enveloping the message that Liz is putting out. So, Liz, I'd love to finish with a little reading from you, please, of a little snippet that calls to you right now.
All right, here's what I'm feeling based on our conversation. I want to share. This is from the closer to the beginning of the book. Towards the end of the second chapter, I've kind of laid out how I like to approach the divine feminine, and this was my wish for readers and for anybody who's exploring her wisdom. Ever since I met her, I've wanted everyone on this planet to meet her too. Not because we all need to be having the same experience, or because I think she is the one and only spiritual path. For the record, I don't. It's because for me, life is so much richer and meaningful with her in it. And it's because her love is so damn good. It's like racing downhill on a roller coaster with your hair blowing wildly in the wind, simultaneously laughing, crying, and hoping you don't throw up. It's like the moment when you give in to your purest pain and the sweet relief that comes from the ugliest cry imaginable, all while your heart is still twisted in knots. It's like that remarkable song lyric, that line in a book, that text that appears at exactly the moment you need it, a wonderful example of synchronicity that your logical brain wants to write off as a neat coincidence, but your heart knows otherwise. It's like the soft, warm weight of a newborn baby sleeping peacefully on your chest in a still room on the darkest night of the year. It's like watching the sun sink into the ocean while you're floating on your back in gentle waves, the briny smell of the sea in your nose and the sky lighting up in front of you in an ever-shifting kaleidoscope of color. It's all this and so much more. Knowing her and loving her has helped me fall in love with the world and with myself in ways that I never dreamed were possible. To love and be loved in this way feels redemptive. It feels miraculous. It feels like coming home. And I still feel that. I still feel that.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for articulating that so beautifully. I don't even remember reading those words ever before, and I would have edited them several times. I felt like that was fresh and real and true and coming through you from her right at this moment. So thank you for that. It feels like a channeling of that experience. Thank you for being here with us, and thank you all. It's such an honor and a delight to be in circle with you and see your faces just responding to Liz's words, and closed eyes and smiles and tears. It is so special, beautiful, wonderful, a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
We'll get a recording of this through, and so you can re-listen to your heart's content. We have done this as a pre-order bonus, so I think I would say please don't share it onwards because it was done specifically for you. Liz may in future choose to release it if she wants to. That is up to her. And so this is for us and for all who have jumped into Liz's offering with both feet and both hands, hearts open. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. Such a joy to share
Mm.
this with you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.